guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I thought I would do a video on talking more about working as a photographer in a small town, because I know there's a few of you who have asked me in the past, how do you go about that? How do you become a photographer in a small town, especially when it comes to fashion and beauty work or commercial work, and is it even possible? So I really wanted to go through a few pointers today that I feel that I learnt living in a town that was not necessarily a big town or somewhere that was called a city necessarily. I lived 2 hours away from the nearest city for the longest time, most of my life, and I was 2 hours away from Sydney, which is the closest city, and I'm currently in Sydney today. However, I still actually live in this town. So I want to talk about my experience a little bit with moving away from my town and then moving back, and how that sort of helped me in doing that as a process for becoming a photographer and within my career. But I also want to talk about how things have changed over the last 10 years or so, and how maybe necessarily moving away to a city might not have to be that option for you. So for a lot of you in smaller towns out there, I think that it's really important to remember that things are different these days. From my experience, this was stretching back to, I guess, late 2008 or late 2007 when I first started photography. And I knew it was what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to get in the commercial and fashion realm. However, I found it a really big struggle back then, being 2 hours away from the city and being young, and it was a hard way to go and hard way to travel all the time to get that work that I wanted to get and to make the contacts that I needed to make as well. However, one thing that I did that I really want to make sure that you guys understand as well is that a lot of the contacts that I made locally first, before I even went to Sydney. And I think that that's something that still stands out as one thing that's really important. If you are living in a small town, I think it's really important to look locally first. Look at where you can make contacts in terms of models, in terms of makeup artists or hairstylists, whoever you're kind of looking at collaborating with on a photo shoot. A lot of the time there are small communities in smaller towns that will have arisen, and a lot of creatives there that you just haven't managed to find yet. So whether that be using Facebook and Instagram as methods of finding these creative people, I think that's the best way to go these days if you are in a small town, because it can be hard, for example, to go looking for models through modeling agencies if you're in a smaller town. Your smaller town may not have modeling agencies at all, like mine didn't. So that was one thing that I had to kind of work up to initially. So I would use family and friends as models, and then I would branch out to the smaller creative community that my town had. And there actually was quite a community there that I had no idea about. And that was by going on websites as well, like Model Mayhem. And back in the day, that was kind of like the main thing where you'd go to work with models. I think these days, Facebook and Instagram tend to be really, really good methods of reaching out to creatives and people through there. So if you're in a smaller town and you're struggling to find those contacts, I think start locally first and start those smaller movements by doing things like that and reaching out through those platforms instead of just going to the nearest city and moving and taking your whole life away without anything behind you first. It's important to develop a bit of a portfolio first before you start reaching out to clients, as I've talked about before. But I think as someone who was living in a smaller town, I felt that going back about 5 years ago, the right move for me was to move to a city, so I did. I moved to Melbourne in early 2016, and I stayed there for 3 years with my partner Dan. And I have to say, there is probably nothing that beats living in a city with so many like-minded creatives. It was one of the best times of my life so far, and I made so many amazing contacts, and I was able to really work to a level that I felt more comfortable with freelancing full-time. I was able to get more regular work. I was signed with an agency. I got a lot of good things out of moving away for a few years. But then in 2019, so last year, around the middle of last year, I moved back with my partner to my smaller town because I was starting to feel that as I was getting older, I did want to be a bit closer to family, and I wanted to kind of explore back in this area and back in Sydney what my opportunities were. However, in doing that, now I have a lot more contacts in Melbourne. So I think that's one thing to remember, that if you look at moving away to be a photographer or to start your career as a photographer, there's always the chance that you can come back to your town if you want to. I think that's one thing to always remember and to think of it as an opportunity later down the track. Especially if you make those contacts that you need to make in the process, then it does make it a lot easier to then work remotely or from your smaller town eventually. I do think these days though, like I said at the beginning of the video, things have really changed in the last 5 to 10 years in terms of how people work. A lot more people are working from home these days. A lot more people are working remotely. And I think with the internet, that's so incredible that you can do that. And there's ways around necessarily moving. If you don't feel like you're in a position to move, I think that it's important to remember that there are other ways to do things and to start a career from your hometown or a smaller town. I think there's just ways that you'll have to look outside, like think outside of the box essentially. And whether that be contacting brands or clients via platforms like Instagram, for example, or Facebook, those are really great ways to start collaborating with brands and to get your work out there without even having to travel, without having to move or to really, move to another city. That's such a huge thing for people to do, and that's an amazing thing that you can do from the comfort of your own home. If you wanted to, for example, work with certain brands that were in a completely different city, you could contact them via Instagram and say, hey, I'd love to do a collaboration with you first, and start to work with them on a basis like that, where they start to find out who you are and what your work looks like, but you don't have to make that trip. I would say though, for those of you who are concerned about moving to another city, I think if you don't move to another city, you do have to be willing to do some sort of travel. There's got to be different ways that you can fit travel into your lifestyle there. I think with living in a smaller town, you can still do that, I think, these days with being a photographer, but to start recognizing that travel might be part of your career. For me, at the moment, it's not really happening because of COVID, for example, but I think for the other part of the year since I've moved back from Melbourne, I've been back down there maybe about 4 times or so. So I think that that's really important to factor in as well, is that travel is probably going to be a big part of your life if you choose to work from a smaller town. But one thing I would add to that is that's completely doable, and in this day and age, you can do it. One thing that I like to do when I go back down to Melbourne, especially since I've made contacts down there, I tend to do a lot of photo shoots. So for those of you who are wanting to work with agencies but don't want to make the move, one good thing to do is when you take a trip next to, say if you're in America, for example, and you don't live anywhere near LA or New York, but you do a trip there. Say you spend maybe 1 to 2 weeks there, I would do as many test shoots as I possibly could with any agencies there. And if you do that, if you sort of organise and plan beforehand for these trips that you take, you can really get a lot of content, and then you might have content, say, for the next 3 months, 4 months, and you might not have to take another trip for another 4 months or 5 months or so. So I think that's important to remember as well, is plan around your trips if that's something that you're considering doing in the future for your career, and actually make it work for you. And that's completely acceptable and doable these days, and I know a lot of photographers that actually do that. I think another thing to add here as well is to, if you are looking at starting a career from a small town and you're wanting to stay in that small town for the most part, I think it's really important to start diversifying your revenue streams. And I talk about this a lot throughout my videos, but this is something really important if you want to think more about staying in a smaller town and working remotely. You may not have that opportunity to do photo shoots all the time and to earn that income from photo shoots working in person with clients. So this is really imperative that you start looking at other ways to earn money and other revenue streams, whether that be retouching. Working online as a retoucher is such a great way to work remotely and to still earn money. And a lot of ways of doing that involve e-commerce, so online brands that you can work with. So that's definitely something I think to keep in mind as well. I really want to talk about revenue streams and how to really start expanding on that as a freelancer. And if you guys are interested in seeing more videos like that, definitely let me know in the comment section below. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this little video about me talking about living in a smaller town and sort of moving, whether you should do that and whether that's going to be, the option for the next few years for some of you who may be living in smaller towns. And if you have any questions about this, feel free to put them in the comments section below, because I actually love talking about the subject. I love drawing from my experience on this and really telling people that, you can have a mix of both. You can do the travel thing, you can move, you can stay where you are. There's lots of ways to work around it. It's just a matter of really thinking outside the box and where you can reach out to for revenue as well. So guys, I hope you really enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do. I'll be posting lots more content in the coming weeks. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.